It's U of L Today on 93.9 The Ville. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
And welcome to U of L Today with Mark Hebert. So glad you're joining us this day. We're going to be talking a lot of politics for the next half hour. So if you're not interested in the least bit on how the presidential race might impact Kentucky, or not interested in Donald Trump, any of that stuff, might as well go ahead and turn the channel right now. But if you are interested in politics and interested in following what's going on, I've got three experts from the University of Louisville who are here to talk about it. So that's what we're going to talk about for the next half hour. And I think there are a growing number of Americans looking at this presidential election with a bit of disbelief. So there are some believers in front of me, I think, and we're going to talk to them. So first off, Gary Gregg, who is the director of the McConnell Center at the University of Louisville, is sitting to my right. Welcome back, Gary.
Hey,
thanks for being
Mark.
on.
Thanks for having us.
All right, Jasmine Ferrier is a political science professor at the University of Louisville. Welcome, Jasmine.
Thank you, Mark.
And Charlie Zimmerman's back for another round too, communications professor at U of L.
Thanks for having us.
All right. We met, I guess it was in the fall sometime. We talked about the presidential race and decided it was so much fun we'd do it again. So here we are. I don't even know where to start. When I sent you guys an email, I said, let's talk about the Republicans first and the Democrats, and then maybe talk about the total impact on Kentucky. So are you all as dumbfounded as I am by this presidential race? Are you just shaking your heads every day going, what in the heck is going on out there?
I think when we were here last, I offered to turn in my political science union card because I couldn't understand what was going on. And I don't think things have changed on that. It's still confusing to most of us that have watched politics for a while.
That's Gary Gregg, by the way, so you recognize the voice. Jasmine, are you bumfuzzled by this whole thing?
I am, but we have to remember that political life is emotional as well as intellectual, and so it's the emotional connections that seem to be driving the races on both sides, not the obvious intellectual, so-called rational motives. So, for example, do voters even know themselves is one interesting question. When you have evangelicals flocking to Donald Trump in South Carolina over Ted Cruz, we have to wonder how much voters really do connect their own ideology, experiences, and policy preferences with individuals.
And what do you think?
Well, I think that it's a more complicated question of representation. So you have Bernie Sanders, who has a cult-like following of college-age students. He's 74 years old.
Which I don't get.
We have Donald Trump, who's talking about representing poor and uneducated people. So what we have is clearly not a policy and rational intellectual connection. We have something more visceral. And I think that's perhaps why professionals have had a harder time getting a handle on it.
Charlie, you figured out what's going on yet?
I think that Jasmine made some excellent points. I like that, Jasmine. That was an excellent...
That's why she's a political science professor.
An excellent dissection of it.
You can take a class at U of L.
I was with a number of people from inside the Beltway this weekend. Some of them lobbyists, some of them retired lobbyists. And these are people whose jobs, whose profession, whose futures depend on predicting things well. And they were with Gary Gregg. They were ready to turn in their cards and go back to whatever retirement home they were planning to live in. Yes, I think people have had a hard time figuring this out. And I'm pretty sure that the senior senator from Kentucky is one of those. It's my perception that he and many of the people in the Republican establishment thought that Donald Trump was a shooting star who would flame out. He has not, and now they have a hell of a problem on their hands.
Do they have a hell of a problem on their hands? Do the Republicans the Republican establishment, do they have a hell of a problem on their hands? We're talking just before Super Tuesday, where I think we probably all agree Donald Trump is going to do very well. If Donald Trump is the nominee as it keeps going along, and it appears that way, does the Republican Party have a hell of a problem on their hands?
I'm willing to jump in because I spent a lot of time this weekend talking with people, and I believe they do. Two things here. It appears that Donald Trump's numbers are not capped absolutely as low as we thought they were, but they are capped. Now, he starts off with 191 electoral votes, whoever's the Republican nominee does. But he's going to have to win states where there are millennials, where there are diverse populations, in order to get from 191 to 270. I was talking to these people this weekend, and they are not, these are Republicans, they're not going to vote for Donald Trump. and they're not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. And they're going to stay home, and they're going to leave the election to the millennials and to women and to Hispanics. And I don't think that Donald Trump can carry those 9 or 10 states that he needs to carry.
That was Charlie Zimmerman, who's a communications professor at the University of Louisville. Also with me, Gary Gregg and Jasmine Ferrier. Gary, you were going to chime in. Go ahead.
I think I'll just add a I'll add a counter. I think Charlie's generally right on that, except I'll offer for argument's sake at least a counter argument that maybe it's not all that bad. I think it probably is, but we don't know Trump. I mean, Trump has defeated all of our understanding of what he has been doing. He says common sense says the most outrageous things, and nothing sticks to him. We used to call Reagan the Teflon president. This guy is Teflon. It doesn't change, no matter what he says and what he does. I'm not sure we see the Donald Trump now that we will see in the fall if he is running against Hillary or Bernie. So I think he has the possibility of becoming something different and maybe appealing to other voters. If you look at the turnouts in the primaries, they are way up for Republicans. There is energy there, and so they are way up. The Democrats have been up a little bit, but down generally. So there's energy on the right and seem to be coming out, and people that are not traditional conservative Republicans are coming out as well. And I think we'll probably see that when you get to the Midwest. So you add those in, and maybe there's another surprise, a Trump surprise waiting in the fall. But I think the general assumption still has to be that electorally he's in trouble. And I don't think millennials are going to come out and vote that much, frankly, once Bernie's out. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. But he's going to have trouble winning Hispanic states with decent Hispanic populations, black populations, and so we'll see what happens.
Jasmine, with this, there appears to be a lot of anger with really staunchly conservative Republicans about the Obama administration, the direction the country's going. Why hasn't Ted Cruz just grabbed the Republican Party by the throat and said, "I'm your guy. If you want the staunch conservative, we're going to take this country in a total different direction where it needs to go. I'm your guy." Why hasn't he been able to energize folks to the nth degree on that?
Well, I think that Cruz has a lot going for him on paper. But it also shows that in politics, personality matters a lot. It's very hard to say you're a conservative and not embrace traditional hierarchy and culture. So his behavior as a senator is not conservative at all. Conservatives prize deference, and his behavior toward the leader, Senator McConnell, his behavior toward Senate norms has been very off-putting to a lot of people inside Washington. And I think that on the outside, we don't appreciate how relationships matter and how respect matters. So in that sense, being a China shop destruction agent is really not a way to win your hearts and minds.
And where has Senator McConnell fit into all this? We're going to talk a little bit more about how Kentucky's affected a little bit later in the show. But, he's kind of stayed on the sidelines of this, as he probably should, as the majority leader in the Senate. But he's also got some tough decisions coming up on who's going to replace Scalia. There's some other hot issues out there that are going to play into this thing. How does Senator McConnell fit into the presidential race, not just on the Republican side, but maybe the presidential race, period? Who wants to tackle that one?
I will, because I think that his decision to say absolutely no to any Supreme Court nomination during the next year is the issue in this campaign. And he knew that when he made that decision. On the one hand, it's going to energize many of his people who are going to see the Supreme Court for the next 20 or 30 years at risk. On the other hand, it's going to antagonize a lot of people on the other side who see him as a symbol of everything they see wrong in Washington, the dysfunction, the lack of civility, the lack of cooperation, the fact that they won't even hold hearings or even entertain a nominee. So, and to me, that's going to be the big issue, because we have 10 states where independents are a good number. They're going to determine those states, and whether they're going to be conservative-leaning independents who say, yes, I think this is right, we should hold off to see who the president is going to be, or whether we're going to have independents who say, look, I'm a progressive, thoughtful people who, like Jasmine says, understands deference and order and decorum, and I'm getting tired of this. So I see this as the issue.
The next Supreme Court justice and who appoints it and how they get there, you think that's the biggest issue in the presidential race and will be in November?
I do.
Really?
Yes.
I think I disagree, but I'm interested in hearing on what you two have to say,
I think
Jasmine.
it's a split between the party philosophy when it comes to the primaries versus the general election. So I agree with Charlie that Senator McConnell is going to be the face of the Republican Party. Whether this behavior is attractive to the Republican base is an open question. It might be very attractive. And I think for him to use what seems to be a limited institutional power in such a broad way would be very enticing for a lot of base voters. Let's keep in mind that the party leaders of both chambers are only elected by their own voters and then by their own conferences or caucuses. But they really don't have a lot of direct power over the lives of their fellow members, especially in the Senate, where you can be a loose cannon, as we know. But in the general election, is Senator McConnell really going to be the face of the Republican Party? I think that that's a bigger risk because party leaders have inside tasks and outside tasks. Their inside tasks are to be legislative experts, be able to make inside deals, know their conferences, and understand how to make things happen. Senator McConnell has all that, and that's why he's leader. But to be the outside face is where a lot of party leaders get tripped up. You can think about Newt Gingrich, Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid. There is a lot more of a minefield out there if Senator McConnell is going to insert himself directly or indirectly, as Charlie says.
Eric puts you on the spot a little bit as the director of the McConnell Center and a close personal friend of Senator McConnell. But go ahead and
It's a nonpartisan center.
And
let's get your 2 cents.
I know nothing, so let's put it that way. But that said, as an observer of it, people aren't. This election is not going to be driven by Mitch McConnell or Harry Reid or any other. Voters are going to care about the presidential candidates. They're not going to care a lick about who's running the Senate. When they were voting for president, so that's just a non-starter. It's not going to be. And he is also disciplined in a way that Gingrich hasn't. He knows his job. He is focused, and he's focused on keeping the United States Senate, and that's where he's going to put his efforts. He's not going to become a face of the party. He's going to be out raising money. He's going to be working with Senate candidates to try to keep the majority in the Senate. And so I think he's not going to be part of that. The decision on the Supreme Court, however, I think it should be the most important thing in this election. I mean, this makes if he's able to hold the line on this makes the entire control of the federal government in the hands of that election. Because the next appointee, if it's a Democrat, will put a Democrat on the Supreme Court that will change what the Constitution means for the next 30 years or so. They will have control. They will take control potentially of the United States Senate, probably not the House, but the Senate's up in the air and the presidency. So I think it's this puts a huge burden. I'm not sure the conservatives will be very active about this. It will be a reason why some of them will swallow hard and vote for Trump, and I think there will be some on the left that will be active on this. But most of the American people are not going to understand the issues. They're not going to understand what's going on. They're not going to care if we're having a vote or not about the Supreme Court. And I think it's just it'll be pushing activists and pushing money, but it won't be pushing the average voter.
I tend to agree with you. Charlie's going to disagree. But go ahead, Charlie.
One last point, and I know we haven't much to cover. By saying no, nothing, no hearings, no entertainment, no meeting with this person, Senator McConnell has more visibly than in just about any other instance shown that the face of the Republican Party in Washington is no, obstruction, no. We're not going to be the loyal opposition. We're just not going to do anything. And that's going to bring that home to all those people who are tired of that. So I think it's going to energize them. On the other hand, the fact that he said, no, we're going to see if we can elect a Republican president, I think it's going to energize the right wing as well. I see that issue as being the issue, more so than anything else. No, maybe national security, maybe the economy, but those can't be articulated the same way that this can.
I'd like to kind of chime in on this too. I don't think that Leader McConnell is trying to become the face of the party or insert himself in this at all. I think that that's going to be imposed from the outside, and I think that's the danger of this type of action. For example, How do you galvanize African American voters if there's no African American on one of the major tickets? Well, the answer is to delegitimize an African American president by denying him constitutional rights. And this would be considered by some to be one of many disrespectful affronts to President Obama's constitutional presence and authority. So that will energize black voters. Two, what happens if President Obama nominates a Latino? I mean, Brian Sandoval is being floated as he's the Republican governor of Nevada. So what happens if President Obama calls the bluff and nominates a Republican or somebody who meets certain demographic needs for the Democratic Party? Again, you're going to have a white nominee in Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton. Now we're going to animate two different sets of minority voters, Latino voters and African American voters, in a time when they might not have been otherwise motivated.
But Senator McConnell's a really, really smart tactician and a smart guy. Don't you think he just backs off then and says, I think
that honestly, the more Chuck Schumer says that he's going to back down, the more Mitch McConnell will probably stand firm. And I think that the way Schumer is teasing him must be some kind of strange ploy on his part, because why would the senator as leader back down?
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
He has planted the flag. He is focused, and I think let me get on the table as well. I think it's not necessarily about politics, and we tend to think of it's all politics. But I take the Senate oath very seriously. They've taken an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, and I think that's what they think they're doing. Is this next nominee will change the meaning of the Constitution. Period. And if it's a Democrat replacing Scalia, if it's a liberal replacing Scalia who believes in a living Constitution, if you don't believe in a living Constitution, if you don't believe in judicial activism, this action is defending the Constitution. It's beyond politics.
With me, Jasmine Ferrier, who's a political science professor at the University of Louisville, Charlie Zimmerman, who's a communications professor, and Gary Gregg, who's executive director of the McConnell Center. And we're all talking presidential politics here. So we've talked a little bit about the Republicans, perhaps not as much as we should. Gary, I'm going to finish up with you. Marco Rubio was a speaker at U of L last year, I think it was, and he was terrific. Why can't he pull everything together and make a run at Donald Trump?
Well, it's a great question. I think he was terrific in that. I think it's he's young. He looks young. I think is my biggest handicap. But he also is an establishment. He's got a rap of being the establishment figure. We forget in Florida he was the Tea Party guy, but now he's the establishment guy. And the more people come out in Congress in favor of him, or governors, I'm not sure that helps right now. I think
probably
it might hurt him
right now. So that's the problem.
As promised, I think the other thing is he was a terrific speaker. He was very impressive. On the other hand, that's the rap they've used against him. Trump used it, or Cruz used it, and
his can sound bites.
He's got his can. He's beautiful delivering a speech, but it's all the same stuff, and it's not very thoughtful. So.
All right, let's move to the Democrats now. This Bernie Sanders phenomenon. My son, he's a Bernieite or whatever they're calling themselves, feel the burn. I just don't get it. I absolutely do not get it. A guy who pronounces himself as a democratic socialist. As I understand it, most of his colleagues look at him as this kind of a gadfly. He's a backbencher, but he's giving Hillary Clinton a run for her money. So how do you figure that?
Well, it's really a Donald Trump-like phenomenon in two ways. One, he's saying the things that people want to hear, and two, people believe that what he's saying he truly understands and believes. I think that we misunderstand or underestimate how much people don't like being BS'd in politics. I don't think you have to be very smart or educated to know when somebody's trying to sell you something. I think that is just a gut reaction. And most politicians on both sides are selling you something. They're not giving you what is truly in your heart. They're telling you something that is not authentic. And that's where Sanders has really connected with people. Does anybody here among us think that he doesn't truly believe what he's saying? Is he holding back? Is he hiding his real self? I don't think so. That's very attractive. Secondly, it's not just the medium. It's really the message, too. Of course your son wants to live in his universe. Who wouldn't? We all want to live in that universe.
Everything to everybody.
We want it all, and we don't want to pay for it, or we don't want to hear how we're going to pay for it, and we certainly don't want to hear how he's going to work with an opposition Congress. The Democrats may take the Senate back, but what about the House? How is he going to accomplish anything? he has the Donald Trump problem there, except he's not selling it as a personality. He's selling it as a universe, an entire reality.
I'm against the establishment. Vote for me, and and I'll give you everything you want: free college, whatever, free Medicare for everybody, etc. Is that essentially what he?
And if somebody's promising that and they truly believe it, why would you go somewhere else? Why would you go to a more cynical and careful candidate?
Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think
Bernie Sanders is a phenomenon.
I think as we become more polarized in our parties, I think certainly we thought until Trump that Republicans have become more conservative. I don't know where we're going to end up after Trump, but I think one of the untold stories is millennials are really far to the left, and that's one of the things. I think cultural issues sort of started that, gay marriage and things like that, but they've moved economically too. So I think that's a big story. It's not the total story. But millennials are far to the left where they were 10 years ago or so.
Do we all agree that Hillary Clinton's going to be the nominee? Is that a foregone conclusion?
Well, we still have an FBI investigation that's bubbling along, and while it might seem inconvenient for her to be indicted or worse, during a presidential election year, I don't think that anybody's ruled it out. I mean, it seems unlikely, but I would just keep an eye on that FBI investigation.
On the emails we're talking about,
yes,
right?
On the emails. And as far as, I think Gary's right about the millennials, I keep hearing this statistic, and I only can assume it's true, that the millennial generation is equal to the baby boomers in sheer numbers.
And that's a lot of folks.
That is a lot.
But will they go to the polls?
They will vote in. They will be registered in equal numbers to the
Registered.
But will they go to the polls? That's a whole different
That's
story.
a big question.
Right.
Will Bernie Sanders be the running mate for Hillary Clinton?
Only if the Democrats decide that they need a fresh bench and that this vice presidential candidate is not going to be 82 and running for the office.
I think it would be an excellent choice. I do.
Really?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. You talk about your son. I told you about Isaiah, who's 13 and a half. He says, if I were 18, that's the only person I would vote for. He has energized young people. And if I were Secretary Clinton, I'd think seriously about putting him on the ticket. And there are only 10 states in play. And his freshness, his frankness, his non-BS, as Jasmine puts it, might appeal to independents and energize millennials in some of those states, North Carolina, Virginia, places, Colorado, places like that. Yes.
I don't see it. I would say that he's a better candidate for a cabinet position, maybe Health and Human Services or Education. She can make a promise to put him in government, but I think that electorally, I don't see the advantage for the Vermont senator versus a person of color or from a swing state.
If the Supreme Court nominee is not the top issue, as Charlie thinks it will be, and it is ISIS, foreign policy, those kinds of things, and Trump and Hillary Clinton are the two nominees, and you're an independent voter like me, who do you vote for?
Depends on whether you want safe or you want to roll the dice. And I think that's Hillary. You know where Hillary's coming from. She's got lots of foreign policy experience. She's done her work in the Senate and on foreign policy. She did her work as Secretary of State. I think where her advisors are going to be. Basically, her kind of decision making that she makes. So if you feel like you need safety, I think you certainly go with Hillary. But as Jasmine said in the very beginning, this election is about emotions, and that's what's going on right now. And so if you just want to kick some butt somewhere, I think all bets are off, and you might very well be attracted to Trump.
Well, I can take a different perspective. I think that her foreign policy credentials are certainly more stellar than Trump's, but what has she accomplished? And I think that what Trump is doing is getting some leverage based on reality, which is we have spent $3 trillion in the Middle East. It is on fire. We have crumbling infrastructure and educational problems here. She has been in office. She has to be accountable to what her position was as Secretary of State. What did she really accomplish that made things better for anybody in the Middle East? And that's actually a vulnerability for her as much as it is an asset.
Rand Paul dropped out of the race, but got the caucus set up in the state of Kentucky just to fit him so he could run for both president and Senate at the same time. So are Republicans now ticked off enough at Rand Paul for setting up this whole separate caucus system and they don't get to go to the polls that they'll somehow it'll be a backlash on him when he runs for Senate, or not? Or I don't care.
No, not at all. And there's a lot of confusion of what this caucus is, but I don't see any anger in the Republicans that I've talked to or the people that have been volunteering to be part of it. No, I think that's going to be a non-story. It was probably a smart move in the beginning to do. But on the other hand, Kentucky Republicans have pulled this up to the caucus. So we might actually have somewhat of an influence this year, which we haven't had, I guess, in ever maybe in the primaries.
All right, so. Hillary Clinton. Why can't she, or maybe she can, take the Bill Clinton love that he feels in Kentucky, and he won Kentucky either once or twice. Did he win both times? Can she take that love for Bill Clinton and transfer that to Hillary Clinton, assuming she's the Democratic nominee? Can she win Kentucky?
She could if she campaigned here, but she's not going to campaign here. The Republican candidate's not going to campaign here. This is a red state, and there isn't any sense in directing any influence here. She needs to spend her time where she can perhaps win a Senate seat and a lot of electoral votes like Ohio. So she's not going to campaign here. Could she? Yes. Is she? No.
Agree?
I agree. I think that it's unfortunate that the Democratic Party is writing off Kentucky more broadly, and that includes at the local and state level, because there are prime Democratic voters here if Democrats opened up their minds as to what the cultural components include of being a Democrat. And being a Democrat in Kentucky used to be a broader thing than it is today. And I think that's not going to work for the party, again, at the state level or the national level, if they don't figure out how to get rural, white, evangelical conservatives back in the tent.
Without turning off the millennials that we just talked about. I think that's the real problem in Kentucky is, and I don't see a way forward, frankly, the Democrat Party can appeal to those rural, white, church-going, whatever folks, and hold on to the millennials too, because culturally they're so fundamentally different. Hillary could not win Kentucky. She won't compete here. She could not win here. This is a different state than it was in the 1990s. You look at this past election here, pretty much a complete wipeout of the Democratic Party in the state. No, we will not be in play in the fall election.
Let me ask you a question. Does the presidential race have any trickle down for either the state house races, where the Republicans are trying to take over the state House of Representatives? Well, let's start with that one. Does it have any trickle down impact in Kentucky, or not? Or is it all politics are local?
I'm with Chip O'Neill on that. Yeah.
All politics are local?
Well, except that every Democrat in America has the president's face all of a sudden. And the idea of connecting local issues to a national figure seems preposterous at times, but every Democrat is an Obama Democrat. And in the future, every Democrat will be a Clinton Democrat. And they may not play well at the state level.
It depends on. It's the same way with the. I agree with that. Same way with the Senate races around the country is who's turned off not to come to the polls. That might be the question here in those races.
I want to say one thing with respect to what Gary said and the inability to put together a coalition of rural, urban, young millennials. Jim Gray is going to try it, and we're going to have to see how well he does against Rand Paul. I think people underestimate Jim Gray tremendously.
Jim Gray, just for folks who don't know, is the mayor of Lexington who's running against Rand Paul and is an openly gay candidate, probably the first in Kentucky to run a statewide campaign. So we'll see how that goes. All right, any closing thoughts, really, really quick from any of you? What are we going to see in the next, say, month in the presidential race? Is Donald Trump going to come out of Super Tuesday? Hillary Clinton come out of Super Tuesday? They're going to be the nominees, and we'll go from there? Is that what's going to happen?
It has to be a two-person race on both sides within the next month.
Okay. Agree, Gary?
Yeah, that sounds fine to me. I'm not predicting.
I will say what my ultimate thing is that Hillary wins probably as a result of Super Tuesday, although the campaign will continue for a while. I don't believe that Donald Trump ever gets enough votes to win the nomination on the first ballot.
All right, brokered convention. All right. Charlie Zimmerman, Jasmine Ferrier, Gary Gregg, as always, you guys are awesome. I'll try and have you back just before the November election, and we'll talk about all this again. All right, don't forget to catch some of these U of L Today with Mark Hebert shows on Metro TV at various times throughout the week and on KET3 on Thursdays at 5 o'clock. I'll also see you on WHAS TV's Great Day Live with Terry Miners and Rachel Platt each Monday morning at 9 o'clock, talking about something great going on at the University of Louisville. So thanks for listening and watching, and go Cards.